Ladies and gentlemen, enough is enough. Every dream you've postponed, every goal you've delayed, every promise you've broken to yourself has one common root: excuses. And excuses are nothing more than elegantly worded lies. Lies that feel comfortable, lies that feel protective, lies that slowly suffocate the life you could be living. Right now, in this very moment, your future is being shaped. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now, and every "I can't," "I'm tired," "I'm not ready," or maybe later, is stealing pieces of that future from you. This is your wake-up call. Not the gentle kind, the kind that shakes you by the shoulders and demands you open your eyes. If you don't stop making excuses today, you will wake up one day realizing you've run out of time to become the person you were meant to be. But if you choose differently, if you choose responsibility, discipline, and action, your life will transform faster than you can imagine. Your greatness is not waiting for perfect conditions. Your greatness is waiting for you. Excuses are the elegant mask of fear. And men wear this mask more often than they admit. From the outside, it looks like logic, practicality, or timing, but underneath, it's fear of inadequacy, fear of failing, fear of being seen trying and still coming up short. Men are taught to appear strong, composed, unshaken, and so excuses become a socially acceptable shield that keeps the world from seeing the insecurities they're terrified to reveal. Women see this mask far more clearly than men think they do. They notice the hesitation, the avoidance, the moments when a man backs away from his own potential and calls it stress, busy, or not the right moment. Women often interpret these excuses not as laziness, but as a man wrestling with self-doubt he hasn't learned to express. And while they may empathize, they also silently wonder how much longer he'll let fear dictate who he becomes. Men, however, interpret their own excuses as temporary detours rather than emotional barriers. They convince themselves they're being strategic when in reality they are retreating. But every retreat reinforces the belief that they are not enough. And every reinforced belief reshapes their identity until avoiding growth feels safer than pursuing it. Your why must be louder than your comfort, because comfort is the silent trap that convinces men to settle for a life far smaller than the one they're capable of living. Men often anchor themselves in routines that feel safe, habits, patterns, and distractions that offer stability but quietly drain ambition. Without a purpose powerful enough to disrupt that comfort, even the strongest intentions collapse under the weight of convenience. And when intention collapses, excuses rush in to justify the surrender. Women observe this dynamic with a sharpness men rarely recognize. They watch men cling to comfort, not because they lack drive, but because they fear the vulnerability that purpose demands. A strong why requires a man to step into uncertainty, to expose the parts of himself he normally protects, to risk embarrassment or failure. Women don't judge this fear. They see the struggle as proof of potential. What they wrestle with is whether a man will choose purpose over hiding places or allow the ease of complacency to define his future. Men, on the other hand, often underestimate how deeply comfort shapes their decisions. They believe they can break patterns whenever they choose, unaware that comfort rewires their courage, one quiet compromise at a time. And when comfort becomes the guiding force, excuses become the language used to defend staying exactly where they are. Discipline is the shortcut everyone avoids because it demands a level of honesty that men often struggle to face. It requires admitting that improvement won't happen through motivation alone, but through repeated action long after excitement fades. Men frequently overestimate their ability to turn it on whenever needed, believing willpower will appear on command. But without discipline, willpower is just a hope disguised as confidence. And excuses become the bridge they walk across to escape accountability. Women observe this pattern with a blend of empathy and frustration. They see how much potential men leave untapped, not because they lack strength, but because they avoid the daily discomfort, discipline. To women, a man who practices discipline signals reliability, self-control, and emotional maturity. They know discipline isn't about perfection, it's about consistency. What concerns them is when a man talks about his goals with passion, but lives with habits that contradict every word he speaks. Men often view discipline as restrictive, imagining it will take from their freedom rather than expand it. They don't realize that discipline is the very structure that protects them from their own excuses. It's the safeguard that keeps them aligned with who they want to become instead of who they've always been. Action beats perfection every single time because perfection is the fantasy men use to justify hesitation. Men often convince themselves they're waiting for the right moment, the right mindset, or the right plan, when in reality they're avoiding the vulnerability that action exposes. Perfection becomes a sophisticated excuse, one that sounds intelligent but leads nowhere. And every day a man waits for perfect conditions. He strengthens the belief that he's not ready, not capable, or not enough. Women recognize this cycle faster than men admit. They see how perfectionism becomes a barrier to progress, a shield men hide behind to avoid being judged or failing publicly. Women rarely expect perfection from men. They expect movement, effort, and proof that he's willing to step forward even when the path isn't clear. What frustrates them is not the mistakes men make, but the opportunities they let slip because they were busy polishing imaginary scenarios instead of taking real steps. Men, however, tend to mistake planning for progress. They become trapped in overthinking, analyzing every detail, crafting flawless visions of what could be while never engaging in what is. This mental rehearsal feels productive, but it's just a quieter form of avoidance. Without action, intentions remain, fantasies and excuses transform from temporary delays into a permanent way of living. Accountability is the mirror that never lies, because it forces men to confront the gap between who they say they are and who they actually choose to be. Men often build identities around intention, what they plan to do, what they hope to achieve, what they believe they are capable of, but intention without accountability becomes a comfortable illusion. And when that illusion is challenged, the excuses show up to protect the image rather than elevate the reality. Women see accountability differently because they look for alignment between words and behavior. They don't expect men to be flawless, but they do expect them to be truthful with themselves. When a man avoids accountability, women don't interpret it as weakness. They interpret it as inconsistency. They recognize the internal battle between desire and discipline, between ambition and avoidance. What concerns them is not that men fall short, but that some refuse to face the truth about why they fall short. Men often resist accountability because it threatens their sense of control. It exposes the habits they've justified, the promises they have delayed, and the excuses they've repeated until they sound reasonable. Accountability demands humility, and humility requires admitting that effort has not matched expectation. Yet beneath that discomfort lies the beginning of real growth. When a man looks into the metaphorical mirror and accepts responsibility without defense or denial, he regains power over his own story. He stops negotiating with excuses and begins acting from a place of integrity rather than insecurity. Your future self is watching. Don't let them down, because every choice a man makes today becomes the evidence that future version will have to live with. Men often imagine their future selves as stronger, wiser, more disciplined versions of who they are right now. Yet they forget that this evolution doesn't happen magically. It happens through the decisions made in the present moment. Every excuse accepted today becomes a limitation inherited tomorrow. And every act of courage becomes a gift that future self gets to open. Women understand this dynamic differently because they tend to think in terms of long-term consequences and long-term connection. They see the man's potential not only in who he is today, but in who he has the capacity to become. When they watch a man hesitate, stall, or cling to excuses, they don't simply see a lack of action. They see a future version of him who will suffer for it. Women don't expect men to be perfect, but they do hope men will honor the promises they make to their future selves. What disappoints them most is not the struggle, but the surrender. Men, however, often underestimate the emotional weight carried by their choices. They convince themselves that tomorrow will offer more motivation, more clarity, more strength, as if the future is a reservoir of energy that will solve what today's discipline refuses to touch. But the future version of a man is built from repetition, not wishful thinking. He is shaped by the days when it was tempting to rationalize, tempting to escape into excuses. And if today's man keeps choosing the path of least resistance, that future version becomes a shadow instead of a leader. Your future self is watching every moment you hesitate, every moment you push forward, every moment you choose growth over comfort.